Let's see what happens when we play with a little alchemy. We know that if we bring yeast and water together, no chemical reaction will take place. They will not merge together until we add another ingredient. But if we add a little sugar, the two will come together and foam and bubble. There are two stories, and we can perhaps call them yeast and water. The first story is that story in a time long ago, in a place far away, Istanbul, where there was a man by the name of Zacchaby. They called him Zac for short, and he was a good man. He followed all of the laws of the religion of the day. He did good works. He gave alms to the poor. He was honest. And this did not go unnoticed by the gods. So it was decided to send a divine being to give Zac assistance. But since these celestial beings are so pure that they cannot come down into the very dense human forms, the celestial being was sent in the form of a dove. Now, Zac began to notice that good things would happen to him, fortuitous occurrences, and he would notice that there was a dove. And so, before long, Zac became fixated on doves. He looked for doves to see for a sign whether something good was going to happen to him. He fed the doves. He had doves embroidered on his shirts. He even began to teach that doves had a sacred duty, etc., etc. But before long, of course, the gods convened again and realized that what they had sent was doing Zac a very great disservice, and so they withdrew their gift. And the second story is the story of an old man called Jabati. Now Jabati lived, he had been born and lived in the great city of Jerusalem. And he too followed all the mores of his religion. And he loved to read the ancient and sacred books. He particularly loved the stories about King David, and in particular that story which describes the time in King David's life when he had a sacred harp that hung in his window. And when the wind blew, the harp would play, and he would gain inspiration to write the Psalms or to read the future. And Jabati was so enamored of the thought of this harp that he became a maker of harps as his livelihood. But all the harps that he made never seemed to make the sound that Jacques Baptiste imagined that King David's harp would sound. But he longed to hear the sound of this harp. And he became fixated on this thought. And even though he was growing to be an old man, he decided that he would go to seek where this harp was to be found. And from the stories, it was told that the harp was now located in the great city of Cairo, hanging on a willow tree. So even though his family tried to deter him from embarking on this quest, Jacques Baptiste set out to look for this harp. Of course, the travels were very arduous, and he grew tired and thin, oftentimes hungry and bone-weary, until he found himself in the great city of Cairo. And of course there were many, many willow trees there, and he went from tree to tree to tree, but no sign of any harp was found. He became so weak and so disheartened. He decided to go to that place where the great saints of that city were buried, their shrines. And he lay himself down, and just as he was about to fall into a deep sleep, he felt a presence. And when he looked behind him, there was a being who was obviously not of the earthly realm, who asked him, "What is it you're seeking?" And he told his story. "Oh," says this being, "the harp is not here. The harp is in Jerusalem." Now, Jacques Baptiste was delighted to hear. He had come so far, and now he realized this harp was in his own homeland. But somehow the meeting with this being had lightened his heart and his step, and he was able to make his way back to the great city of Jerusalem, his hometown. In a very short while, when he returned, his family were greatly pleased to see him, and they did not ask, because he had obviously failed in his quest. But he did not speak anything of this to them. But after his return, he began to seek the willow tree in his home place. And of course, in Jerusalem, there are many willow trees. He went from tree to tree to tree, but no sign of the harp was to be found. But then one day, when he felt that his quest was failed, he heard the sound, a deep, melodious, mellifluous sound of a harp. He turned this way and that way and the other way, until he found the clear path of the sound, and he began to follow it. It led him to a great old willow tree, but when he looked, there was no sign of an instrument in its branches. But then the sound was clear, and he walked around the great trunk of the tree, and behind it he found the opening to a cave. Shabati entered that cave, and in it all was dark, but the sound of the harp's music was clear, and he followed it where it led. It led him out into a great garden, and in that garden there were many willow trees, and in every willow tree there hung a harp. And there, where the sound was coming from, there was the great willow tree in which hung the instrument that Shabati knew was the one that he was seeking. He sat down under the tree to allow its sounds to resonate through his being, and it's said that he sits there still. So there are two questions that arise from these stories. What is the difference between them, and what is it in you that is and could be described as the sugar that allows them to come together like yeast and water, to merge, to froth and bubble, and allow you to bring forth the answer to this and all other questions. What is the difference between these two stories, and what is the ingredient that you are, that you have, that allows all the chemistries of life to come together to bring forth that which you know, the wisdom? What is the first answer? What is the difference between these two stories? Zakabi and Shabati.